Alright people, welcome to part 2 of this guide. We're going to be talking about PvP power and what it does in Mr. Pandaria. Let's get her started. Welcome to the video people. We're going to be talking about PvP power today. But first, this information was provided by Eldakar at battlemasters.org. I highly encourage you to go over to this website, check it out, read the article for yourself, and of course, this is where you're going to find, looking for group chat for rated battlegrounds. Come Mr. Pandaria if you're on a low pop realm, or you're on a realm that doesn't have a whole lot of interest in this. Now I'm going to do the best I can over the next few minutes to visualize a lot of these concepts, but a lot of them I'm not going to be able to just simply put up a visual for. They're mathematical equations, it's hard to do that with, but I'm going to do the best I can. In this video there will be no annotations. There's just too much to cover, and there's not enough annotations. They basically just fill up the screen. So, bear with me, watch the video the whole way through, and you will know quite a bit about PvP power by the end of it. And there will be a special segment at the end for my Fury Warrior friends out there. Alright, so we're going to be talking about PvP power and what it actually is. So bear with me, this is going to get a little bit complicated and kind of annoying, but here we go. PvP power is being introduced in Mr. Pandaria as part of the expansion, and it's actually meant to be the offensive complement to PvP resilience. Resilience being your damage reduction, and PvP power being your damage multiplier. Now, basically what Blizzard's done is they've taken all of the player versus player gear and attached this power stat, PvP power, to it. So not only does it come with your damage reduction, but it will also come with a damage multiplier versus other players. This is an attempt to make PvE, or player versus environment gear, a little less appealing in arenas and rated battlegrounds, because you can gain direct percentages versus other players versus whatever primary stats will be found on a player versus environment piece of gear. That's the basic concept behind it. Now we're going to go a little more in depth. Okay, this is the part of the video that's going to get really complex, so bear with me. I'm going to try to visualize this the best way I can, so you're just going to have to deal with it. I can't visualize everything, so I'm just going to be attaching the numbers to these characters. You're going to have to just listen to what I'm saying. But the way PvP power scales in Mr. Pandaria is different than resilience. We've already talked about resilience and how it scales exponentially, meaning that it compounds on top of itself. After 50%, it becomes worth twice as much, 60% 3 times, etc., and so forth. PvP power scales linearly, which means it scales in a straight line. It doesn't compound on top of itself, it just basically adds to itself. For example, this warrior here is being given 265 PvP power. That gives him a 1% increased damage versus another player. Now let's say that warrior Raging Blows, and it does 100 damage normally. If you add that 1% additional damage multiplier on top of it, it will now do 101 damage. Now if you add enough PvP power to him to get him up somewhere around the 10% range for increased damage, that attack will only do 110% damage. Now mind you, you had to add quite a lot of PvP power to him to get to that 110 damage Raging Blow. So it doesn't feel like it scales as efficiently, and it actually doesn't. And it kind of has diminishing returns, but not really. Let's put that into context. Let's take our warrior here, who is doing that 100 damage Raging Blow. If he goes from 0% increased damage to 1% increased damage, that Raging Blow will only go from 100 damage to 101 damage. Now say he has 30% increased damage, he'll do 130 damage. But if you just give him 31%, which is another 256 PvP power, he's only going to do 131 damage. It doesn't scale nearly as well as PvP power, but it does decrease the target's effective health. We'll be talking about that in a few minutes. Now before we continue on, I wanted to point out this graph quick, which shows the linear scaling of PvP power rating. As you can see, there are 3 green lines underneath it. One is a full PvP geared, plus socket bonus player. The other is the typical Season 12 maximum player, conquest gear, etc. And then you see on the far end of the scale, a human warrior at Season 12 maximum. I wanted to explain this disparity quickly, and it's basically because humans have the option of not taking a PvP medallion. Basically what this means is every other part of the graph is set up to display someone that has one PvP DPS trinket and one PvP medallion or Horde or Alliance medallion. Humans, however, do not need a medallion. They have the racial every man for themselves, which they can trigger at any time. So they are actually able to carry 2 DPS trinkets, which gives them increased PvP power. Now, let's debunk a PvP power rumor. This is one of the biggest misconceptions that I've heard, and I've been told this over and over again. People have been ragging on me for weeks and weeks about it, saying, oh, why are you stacked strength? You should be stacked PvP power because it gets rid of resilience. It doesn't. Let me demonstrate. We're setting up 2 warriors now. The one on the left is going to have a 50% PvP power rating. The one on the right is going to have a 50% resilience rating. Now, let's say the one on the left will do 100 damage, but it's multiplied by its PvP power, so now it does 150 damage. Most people are assuming that because he's doing 150 damage, it now completely negates the resilience of the warrior on the right, who has 50%. That's not the case. What happens in this scenario is the warrior on the left will hit for 150 damage. The warrior on the right's resilience will reduce that by 50%, meaning that warrior will only hit for 75 damage. Now granted, because he had the PvP power, he is hitting for more than he did before. Because if he hadn't had that PvP power, he would have only hit for a 100, which would have been reduced by 50%, and he would have only done 50 damage total. Okay, this is where it gets a little confusing. Bear with me. We're going to use our 2 warriors again. This time, the warrior on the right is the flag carrier, the warrior on the left is the 100 damage warrior. The warrior on the right has a 50% reduction in damage and a 100 health pool. His actual effective health is 200. If you don't know what it is, please go back and watch my first video, because I can't cover it here. So if the warrior on the left hits the warrior on the right, he's going to do 50 damage a hit, because 100 minus 50% is 50. However, if you give the warrior on the left a 50% PvP power bonus, his damage actually goes up to 150 damage. But what does that mean for the warrior on the right? It actually means his total effective health is worth a little bit less. Now, if you remember me saying in my first video, anything above 50% is worth twice as much. Because if the warrior on the left had hit him for 100 damage, he'd have had to do it 4 times to kill him. However, because the warrior on the left has this bonus, he only needs to hit the warrior on the right 3 times now, and he'll actually overkill him by 25 damage. What does that mean for the flag carrier? His total effective health, instead of being worth twice what it is worth slightly less. And his total effective health goes down from 200 to 175. Because now it only takes 3 hits to kill him. I hope that makes a little bit more sense for you. So here's the last thing we're going to talk about in our video. What's better, stacking PvP power or a primary stat? And this is a hot button topic because no one really knows yet. And unfortunately, neither do I, but I can give you some clues. And I will know within the next week which one's better. Here's what we know so far. Every time you gain 265 PvP power, it'll grant you 1% increased damage. PvP power gems in Mr. Pandaria can grant you 320 PvP power, which is just a little bit over 1% per gem. Primary stat gems only grant 160 of the primary stat, strength, intellect, etc. Now, because I'm a warrior, I'm going to talk about this from the warrior's perspective, because that's what I know best. But I don't know everything about a warrior, and particularly, I don't know the mathematics involved behind some of our mechanics or our abilities. And that's what you need to know to have a definitive answer if stacking a primary stat or a secondary stat is worth more. It seems for Death Knights, it might actually be worth it to stack the PvP power, because their primary stat doesn't play as heavy a role on their abilities as it does for a warrior. For example, most warrior abilities are not static damage. They won't hit for the same damage every single time. That's because it'll be the ability's damage plus or times a percentage of your attack power, and you gain attack power from strength. The real question here is how much attack power do you gain per point of strength. And I'll be figuring that out in the next couple of weeks. But this is actually important because if you can gain more points per point of strength in attack power, it would be better to stack your strength. However, if you can gain a bigger damage increase from the PvP power, you would want to do that. Now there's one other thing I can say on this subject until I give you a definitive answer, and that is the set bonuses and socket bonuses are still set up in such a way that we need to use different colored gems. Particularly, our meta socket is not set up for blue gems, which PvP power is. So, I'm going to go out on a limb in here and say, for an arms warrior, it may be more beneficial to go ahead and stack the strength. But I can't be certain on that until I get all the figures calculated out. And that will be coming in the next week, because I'm going to be really hard focused on this to give you a definitive answer. But since most gears still need different colored gems for their socket bonus, it's safe to assume we are not supposed to stack pure PvP power. I don't think Blizzard would actually work that into the system. So I did promise there'd be a little something for Fury Warriors, and Eldacar confirmed my suspicions that I had all through beta. People constantly ask me, what's better, Fury or Arms? What's doing more damage? And I said, it's pretty neck and neck, because I couldn't actually tell which one was doing more damage total. But now I know that Fury Warriors can do more damage to a player. We're looking at this graph here, and the green line on the left is your typical geared player, who would have 176 effective health, or 176% effective health, and a 56 bonus damage from PvP power. However, on the far right you'll see another green line, and it says Human Warrior Season 12 Max. Now, any other warrior would fall slightly short of this, because the humans have the advantage of being able to carry 2 trinkets, and effectively they're carrying around an additional 10% PvP power on top of every other race. But what we're talking about is the Titan's Grip Fury Warrior versus other characters. Even an Arms Warrior is at a slight disadvantage to a Fury Warrior in a PvP scenario. And this is because an Arms Warrior will hold one two-handed weapon, which will give him 2,000 something PvP power, roughly 10% increased damage, just from holding his weapon. However, a Titan's Grip Fury Warrior gets to hold 2 of these weapons at the same time. Unless Blizzard actually modifies how much damage we do with these weapons, we do 10% more than any other class can, because we get to hold 2 two-handed weapons, which were designed around everyone holding 1 or none. So I hope that helps you understand. And the only reason that a human warrior gains an increased bonus from this is because they'll gain another 2,000 to 3,000 PvP power from their trinkets, because they don't need an extra trinket because of every man for themselves. So that's going to be it for this guide and explaining PvP power and PvP resilience. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave a comment on the video, and if I can, I will answer it. If not, no hard feelings. But that's going to be about it, and look forward to my next video, because I'm going to be giving you a definitive answer on if it's better for a warrior to stack strength or PvP power and Mr. Pandaria.